I said at the beginning of the conference, and Professor Paul Butler and I insisted on doing this last year, this isn't just a conference about people being watched. It's also a conference about people watching back and mobilizing. And so for the remainder of the afternoon, we have a very distinguished group of speakers that will talk about that. Our first speaker is Malkia Cyril of the Center for Media Justice, which is leading, yes indeed, which is leading, the Center for Media Justice and Malkia are leading the Color of Surveillance delegation. I think personally, without question, that Malkia is perhaps the most effective voice in pushing back against the pervasive surveillance we experience today. Last year, Malkia couldn't come, but afterwards, Mac approached me about forming a coalition of grassroots community leaders, the delegation that's with us today. And so Mac will talk with us about that vision, about what it means, and how we reverse the color of surveillance. Mac?
I've been sitting down for a long time. Stand up for me one time. Come on, don't be scared. I understand. Let me hear you say, I believe. I believe that. I believe that we will win. Say, I believe that we will win. See, because while they're out here mining data, we out here mining hope. Go ahead and sit down. I'm supposed to use this clicky thing, right? Okay. And it's going to go like, let me see. Oh, okay. That's me when I am a baby. And that is my mom. Even though I knew my family was from Jamaica, Trinidad, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, I didn't know growing up that I was from an immigrant community. I spoke English, and even though most of my extended family spoke a pidgin that was indecipherable to my ears, I didn't understand that they were from someplace else. I didn't even know where Jamaica was. I didn't understand where the Caribbean was. And I believe that that is part of the isolation of racism that is by design. What I did know was that my mom didn't seem to know any American colloquialisms. I knew that she wore very, very bright clothes, which I did not understand. I didn't see anyone else's parents doing that. What I also knew was that as an educator and a member of the Black Panther Party, my mom taught me from the moment that I could speak to the period of her untimely death 10 years ago on Martin Luther King's birthday, that black did not simply mean American. She reminded me and my sister by moving us to Martinique, St. Lucia, and Trinidad. Oh, I'm going to do it again. Hold on. Oh. Yes, I'm not a technologist. I'm an organizer, just FYI. Yes. By moving us to Martinique, St. Lucia, and Trinidad, pictured here, by building worldwide kinship in Tanzania, South Africa, Nigeria, Belgium, London, Amsterdam, Ghana, Brazil, Haiti, and more, and dragging us to all of those places as young people, that black is a diasporic experience. That we're all on a continuum of forced migration by the unmitigated concentration of white power and capital. My mom taught me that the story that America is a nation of immigrants erases some very critical truths about the violent birth of this country. For we were also slaves and indigenous, robbed of both labor and land. Instead, she made me an internationalist, taught me the difference between immigration and forced migration. We who have been called the savage, the servant, the slave, have been pushed and pulled by capital for centuries. We who run for our lives from slavery or modern day prisons, we who are kidnapped by early capitalists to become America's first currency, chased and recaptured by America's first police, our bodies helping to fill America's first jails. Our data lined America's pockets from the very beginning and lines its pockets today. That same social control, that same stalker state that enforced laws to make the blackest bodies of the world America's first currency, drives persistent racial hierarchy today. Let me say this, thank you, that while we are talking about immigration, I want to be very clear, what we're talking about is white supremacy. We are talking about racism. Today, immigrant and citizen people of color remain the arms of American production, cut off from the means by whose hands all nations have been built around the world. We are the workers, we are the slaves, we are the indigenous whose land and natural resources were stolen along with our labor and our bodies, and we've come now to take it all back. In that goal of reclaiming our undocumented, unauthorized humanity, we have common cause. We share a common enemy, yet sharing a common strategy can be much more difficult. 19th century, oh snap. What is that? Okay. That is something different. Nope, we're gonna leave that alone. I'm gonna leave it right here. I don't know what I did. 19th century Italian theorist Antonio Gramsci said, "The old world is dying. The new world is struggling to be born. Now is the time of monsters." Monsters in the White House seek to claim this political moment, and we must not allow it. American immigration control is one face of that monster, violent and epidemic, rooted in a history of anti-black slavery and anti-indigenous land grabs, designed at its inception to preserve white supremacy and economic exploitation. I want us to be clear, immigration control is about racism. The ascension of explicit white supremacy into the White House and Congress has not only resulted in a 40% increase in immigration-related arrests by ICE through the beginning of May 2017, it's also normalized the use of electronic monitors, stingray devices, facial recognition, and other biometric tools to track undocumented immigrants, all of what we have been talking about today. But while the use of information and technology to monitor and control migration has become the status quo, these conditions can and must be resisted. One of the tools of our enemy is to make us feel like what they do is inevitable and impenetrable. And the point of organizing is to be clear that that is not true. We can and must resist. It is a time of monsters. Since the 2016 presidential election, the Trump administration has intensified the monitoring and criminalization of immigrants of color in the United States, with direct violence, detention, and deportation hastened by the increasing availability of big data and new surveillance technologies. At virtually every stage of the process of migrating or traveling to, from, and within the United States, people of color with and without U.S. citizenship are subject to the legal and extra-legal collection and analysis of extensive quantities of personal information. Here's the thing. This level of mass surveillance chills dissent. Just like mass incarceration dissuades democratic practice, mass criminalization spikes fear and isolation, while mass economic exploitation and inequality deepens resentment. But this heightened and explicit dehumanization doesn't only result in defamation, it also results in death. Ask the 17-year-old Muslim girl who was beaten to death and drowned in a pool in Virginia. The renowned Caribbean poet and author Audre Lorde said it best: "We cannot live without our lives." How can we build a shared strategy when we are literally fighting public and private actors just to wake up and move freely for another day? But this is why I came to you today on a sprained ankle from across the country with my wife, who is fighting stage 4 cancer, to tell you this: I believe that we can win. We have to do everything in our power to see that it is done. Here are some ways I think we can do that. First, I believe we have to reimagine our understanding of who is documented and who is not. 2.3 million people are incarcerated in the United States, while more than 7 million are under the control of the carceral state. Over 60% of those are people of color. My young cousin was just released from prison in California. He does not have a driver's license. He does not have a social security card. He does not have an ATM. He does not have the right to vote. He is undocumented. We have to change our understanding, not because our differences don't matter. They do. But because our differences can illuminate the ways this system works and can tell us with much clarity how we can attack it. We can begin to use these differences as weapons against criminalization. By recognizing the power grab that documentation is, we can wrestle that power back, not simply through reforms that offer some a path to citizenship that has never been realized by those who have fought and died for equal justice, but through organizing, through structural changes that expand beyond a Jim Crow approach to citizenship, beyond pledging allegiance to a nation that has never pledged its allegiance to us. Right here and right now, I ask you to pledge allegiance to each other. I ask you to pledge allegiance to a movement. I ask you to pledge allegiance to a shared vision for change that acknowledges our human dignity, our human rights, and our human liberty. Second, I invite you to expand your thinking around the meaning of sanctuary. We know that there are over 11 million undocumented migrants in the United States. We know that cities and states across the U.S. are adopting sanctuary policies to protect the human rights and dignity of these folks, our people. But the U.S. and global systems of immigration enforcement, criminal law enforcement, and counterterrorism are intertwined. They are not separate systems. And so our movement must also be intertwined. It must be intersectional. It must be multifaceted. It must be international. We have to remember that surveillance technologies were forged to separate the citizen from the slave. Sanctuary must be an antidote to that line, that erases that line. Sanctuary must be expanded beyond a refusal of cities and states to comply with unjust federal immigration laws to include criminal justice and counterterrorism laws as well. The movement organization Mi Gente, for example, recommends that cities and states adopting sanctuary policies also reduce criminal penalties for minor crimes, dismantle inaccurate and racially biased gang databases. But even sanctuary policies, as we heard earlier, can't protect our cities from being from the data that federal authorities demand. We have to encourage our cities and states we have to vigorously encourage our cities and states to withhold data from federal immigration authorities. In order to oppose Attorney General Jeff Sessions' threat to withhold federal money from sanctuary cities, sanctuary must also expand beyond city and state actors to a more popular strategy of noncompliance. But noncompliance requires risk. Risk requires relationships, and relationships require organizing. We must fight not only in the courtroom, but also in the courtyard. Third, we need to build new approaches to security and accountability. Sometimes we rely on the police even when we don't want to. But the thing is, hate crimes against Black, Muslim, migrant, and transgender communities are on the rise. And I speak that because even though we tend to talk about migration and immigration in terms of national origin, I think we need to think about who is unauthorized in this country, who is undocumented in this country, and I think we need to begin including transgender people in that analysis. I say that also because there are millions actually of transgendered, gay, and lesbian undocumented people in this country who are not included in any of the legislative strategies around immigration. So I just throw that in there. All right. I have 2 minutes, so I'm going to go here. Let me say this. Defense is not enough, yeah? We have to secure our communities. We have to defend our people. We can do some of that through security training, and I know we have some of our folks that do extraordinary work around that here. Shout out to Equality Labs, Wellstone, and many others who are doing that work. But defense, we need more than defense. We need to start there because that is where we can build new networks of solidarity. But we also have to demand the tech policies, platforms, and practices that extend human rights and sanctuary to immigrant communities and all communities of color. To have the international and local-to-local conversations we need to build a winning strategy for change. Yes, I did it. We need a digital environment that supports human rights and equal justice. That's why the Center for Media Justice was proud to bring leaders and allies of the Media Action Grassroots Network to Congress yesterday to urge action to prohibit the use of stingray cell site IMSI catchers to find undocumented immigrants, prohibit the use of biometric technologies, for the purposes of immigration enforcement, especially face recognition, so on and so forth. We network and we organize, we ally and partner, but at the end of the day, it is the feet of directly impacted communities who will make the road to surveillance abolition by walking in. It's these leaders that put the analysis heard today into action. They are our best voice, our best hope for change. As we prevent the misuse of technology to drive surveillance, we demand the protection of First Amendment in a digital age as well. We must extend that right beyond a constitutional protection to an affirmative human right that all of us who are unauthorized and undocumented, those they call illegal, can use to speak our truth to power. To do this, we have to keep the internet open. We have to make sure that we have an internet that is affordable and secure for immigrant rights organizing, and we have to resist all attempts of Trump's FCC to repeal net neutrality. I know that that seems like a separate issue, but let me tell you this, how many of you organize protests every day online? That right and power goes away when we lose the open internet. We must press for the non-compliance of technologists, tech users, and companies in the face of rising hate. We must follow the money made by companies like Palantir and others. We must force these decision makers to make the choice to divest from militarized police violence in a digital age and invest in our humanity because the threat is real. To win, we need every single one of us. Unfortunately, anti-blackness is a tool that disables the necessary alliances amongst immigrants across race and between immigrants and citizens of color. I'll say this, alliance building is not easy, but it's worth it. It can prevent the splintering of our demands into shards that force fake scarcity, competition, and have us accept false solutions. Make us give up our most vulnerable members when the state hits us again and again and again with the same high-tech surveillance, the same automatic economic exploitation, the same algorithmic bias, the same data discrimination, the same criminalization. Make no mistake, Officer Yanez, who shot and killed Philando Castile, was Latino. Our opponents have long used whiteness and blackness as a measure of legality, a side to pick, a wedge. We have decisions to make. It is why they have made us the color of surveillance, but I say now, we are the color of freedom. Our differences can be deadly or they can be our best weapon. If we let them, they'll show us the path to power. I've said it before, and I'll keep saying it until there's no breath left in my body. In a time of monsters, we are the new world struggling to be born, and we can be born even in the face of monstrous acts. We must make every place a staging ground for resistance, where we defy this new world order that seeks to use our technology against us. We must defend our communities with digital safety and security. We must demand the digital platforms, practices, and policies that enable the possibility of liberation in our lifetime, because I believe there is no one else. We are the ones we've been waiting for. I believe that we will win. Thank you.